Hello and welcome to this video for Carlam Cymru educators. I am Miss Lucy Saunders and this is a guidance video for A-level art and design. So this is guidance for Unit 2 or Unit 3 and actually could be suitable guidance for Unit 1 in AS as well because all three of the projects contain similar components and are marked using the same for assessment objectives. So whichever part of the A-level you are currently working on, this could be useful for you. So just to remind you of an overview of the whole course, the AS unit, the Unit 1, Personal Creative Inquiry is worth 40% of your qualification. This is the section that is typically completed in Year 12. And then the A-level in Year 13 is Unit 1 that you've already completed, and then A2, Unit 2, and A2 Unit 3. So as I said, this video can be used for guidance, particularly for Unit 2 and Unit 3. And actually what we're focusing on today, you might start by watching one of my other videos, the third video of the AS level guidance, because this also focuses on photography and observational work, which I'll be talking about today, the photography, and is also relevant for the A level as well. So there are 4 videos in this series for A-level, and this video focuses on photography in particular, and then we briefly will look at presentation ideas at the end of the video. You can dip in and out of these videos, excuse me. You don't need to watch them in order, although that is how I've designed them, but they should work as standalone videos as well. So if you particularly think that you would like some support with photography, maybe you just use this video, or perhaps watching all of them through your project or before your project or when you finish to see if you can improve anything. Hopefully they will work in whatever way you need them to. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is photography. So looking at the definition of the word photography, the word photo relates to light, and then graph is a diagram or a collection of points or a visual symbol. So when you put those two words together and get photograph, it is a picture made by using a camera in which an image is focused onto light-sensitive material and then made visible and permanent by chemical treatment or stored digitally. Now, most of you, I would imagine, are taking photographs using a phone, maybe yours, maybe a family member's. Therefore, the part about a chemical treatment is probably not actually the way that you're making photographs, but that is how photographs originally were made. So when we're thinking about photography, it is really important to consider your photographs as part of your artistic output, particularly now that you are at this stage of your A-level. You don't want to be just pointing your phone and taking a photograph and not considering how to control that image and create the best image you can, same as you would with a drawing or a painting or textiles or whatever medium you're working in. Photography is another medium, and I think it's quite easy because lots of us do have mobile phones, perhaps not everyone, but lots of us carry a camera around with us all day and might take sort of purposeless photos quite often, maybe of your dinner or of your pets. Or so the fact that we are so used to taking photographs sometimes means when we then come to take photographs for something more meaningful, for example, for your A-level, it's easy to overlook certain elements and not get the quality that you are very capable of getting. So when we're thinking about photography, same as with any art form, it's important to consider your composition. This refers to the layout, the arrangement, and how the viewer's eye is led around the image. It says here compositions might be formal, informal, balanced. They might create tension. You might use the golden ratio or the golden section or the rule of thirds in order to create a visually pleasing proportion. And this is often used in photography, and we'll talk about it more later as well. And these are just setups or visuals that our brains like. So they tend to work, and there's a series of rules that fit into what works. So fundamental to any image are its visual elements, and these are something we talk about in all areas of art and are relevant to photography as well. So we have tone, light and dark, form, which is 3D, and space, which is 3D, shape, which is 2D, texture, pattern, colour, and line. There are other visual elements, but those are the main ones we're going to focus on. Another thing to think about is that photography didn't exist pre-1850. So the purpose of photography has really, really changed over this time. And the purpose of your photography is something that's important to focus on during your project. Excuse me. Because before photographs, if a person wanted their portrait to be recorded, typically rich landowners would employ a artist to sit and paint the landowner, his family, his land, often painting in objects that he had to show his wealth, perhaps adding embellishments to the clothes to make him look more important and more rich and more powerful. Obviously, once the camera was invented, it was possible to document something that was happening without having to paint for hours. But obviously, the initial cameras were not like an iPhone in your pocket. They were much more elaborate to use and much more expensive to use. So there was a long time where it was very rare for someone to have their photograph taken, and then it became more and more popular and more typical for people to book photo shoots. For example, I can remember when I was really young, my family going to a professional photography studio, which it wasn't as, that sounds very fancy, and it wasn't. It was quite a relatively normal thing to go and do, perhaps once or twice while your children were young, to go and have professional photographs taken, because otherwise you couldn't get the kind of quality photographs that we have now on our phones. So then as phones developed and developed cameras, that is really, really, really recent. So it is a much, over history, this is a very sudden development that we have photographs of so much. I take 10 photographs of my dog probably every day. And you probably do too. You probably have even more photographs than I do. So thinking about shifting the purpose of that photograph and considering the importance of photography as an artistic tool. So the first technique that I would like us to look at is aperture. So aperture, the definition is an opening or a hole or a gap. The Latin, it comes from apertura, which means to open. So when you hear about aperture in photography, perhaps you've heard that word before or maybe you haven't, it is referring to, in fact, I'm just going to skip through these and come back. It is referring to how open or closed the lens of the camera is. So that word means to open, and you can see the little diagram in the middle. The large aperture is where the lens is very open, and the small aperture on the other side is when the lens is very closed. So if you think about it, if the lens is very open, a lot more light is going to come in, and if the lens is very closed, a lot less light is going to come in. With your iPhone camera or Android camera or smartphone camera, this is different, but you can put these settings onto apps and things on your phone. So if you're using a camera rather than a phone, these settings are things you can apply. If you're using a phone, you might be able to create this technique where your phone is imitating this. So it's still important to understand what it is that you're doing if you are doing this. So you can see from the two examples, when the lens is very open and a lot of light comes in, the image in the forefront, so the teddy, is in very sharp focus and the rest is quite blurred. On the other side, when the hole is quite closed, a lot more of that image is in focus. I'll show you a few more examples of that. Here, for example, the camera is in focus, but the background is blurred. Same here, the pebbles in the foreground are in sharp focus and the background is blurred. Same with the flowers. Same here, the one face is really focused and the rest are blurred, and with the peg as well. So this technique is experimenting with aperture. So a really interesting thing that you can do. Play with it on your phone. You can get your phone to sort of do this if you focus on something in the foreground by tapping on the camera app. But you can also, excuse me, you can also download apps that will create this effect. So a photograph is made, as I said, by light being let into the camera. And how much light is going to affect how the picture looks. So there's that diagram again. On the left is a large aperture where the lens is very open. That little circle is a diagram of the lens. More light enters the camera, so you have a shallow depth of field. And on the other extreme, the aperture is very small, the hole that's open is very small, and it has a greater depth of field. You don't need to know these things for your A-level. This is just if you are interested in photography and wanting to demonstrate as many techniques as you can and learn more. And particularly if you are thinking of specialising towards photography or using it a great deal in your development, being an expert in that subject is really important. But don't worry if you're thinking this is a lot. It's not something you need to know. It's just if you are interested. So the camera, as I said earlier, has a hole inside that opens to let light in, and you can adjust it, and that is what aperture is. So the elements and principles of design in photography, as I mentioned before, the formal elements are slightly different to those in art and design, but they're very similar. There's no definitive list, and I said a few earlier, and they are down the side there in that table. So you've got focus, light, line, repetition, balance, form, space, texture, tone, and unity. So these are helpful vocabulary for you to use as you are reflecting upon your work. So remember, all the way through your project, you need to record your ideas and reflect on how well things are going, and you need to demonstrate art-specific vocabulary. So this is photography-specific vocabulary that you can use in the moments when you are talking about photography. If you've done the earlier videos, and perhaps if you've worked through the project in the same order that I'm suggesting, which is just one approach, you might have written your extended piece of writing already. You might have done that in an essay form, or you might do that throughout your sketchbook or however you are presenting. These are great words to help you write in that way. So screenshot this, pause it and have a look, write down those words. They are really going to be useful. The next slide explains each of those. So I'm not going to read them all out because that will take half the video, but that is there so you are able to use it when you are discussing your photography or other artists' photography. So for example, if you're looking at perspective, scale or size of parts of the picture. So where do you place the camera to affect this? And have you used a worm's eye view or a bird's eye view? And I'll talk a bit more about worm's eye view later on. So if you are writing about photography, like I said, screenshot this, come back to it, pause the video, make some notes. This can be really, really helpful with your language and how to structure that writing. So the other thing on this page that I've put here is Steve McCurry's composition tips, and there are 9 of them. So Steve McCurry is a very famous, very successful photographer. And there is a link to a YouTube video that is only a short video, but it is really powerful and really helpful in understanding some compositional tips for your photography. And I am going to talk through them now, but it'd be great to go and watch the video as well. The link is there and on the PowerPoint as well. So the first of his tips are the rule of thirds. So you can see here that this photograph by Steve McCurry has been divided into 9 sections. So placing objects of interest where the sections intercross is a way of creating, as we mentioned earlier, something that is aesthetically pleasing to the eye, something that our brains like. So you can see here that the figure has been placed right where those 3s intersect, and that creates an interesting line. You might have seen this is an often a very typical technique to use when people are taking landscape pictures. So they might have the bottom section is the land, for example. The middle section might be the horizon, maybe a mountain line, or maybe the horizon between the sea and the sky, for example. And then the top would be the sky. So they have deliberately angled the picture so that those 3 sections are relatively equal. Sorry, just to go back to there for a second. Which again creates a visually pleasing image. Same thing here, leading lines create a visually pleasing image. You can see with Steve McCurry's example, those lines all come to a point which is actually coming towards the man's face, which is where we want the eye to be drawn. So again, just a really successful, aesthetically pleasing image. Same thing with diagonals, drawing the viewer's line of vision into a certain point. Framing, so here he has used a car window. You could use a door frame, a car window, a house window, just thinking carefully about using things that already exist and looking through them to frame what's already there. Contrast between background and subject. So the example here, you've got dancers on stage wearing white dresses. Everything else is very, very dark. So this is an excellent technique whether you are looking at portraiture or objects. Having that really extreme contrast between light and dark can be a really visually pleasing thing to do. It was also an excellent technique when you are going to draw from your photographs. So for example, if you're looking at a person's face, one side is really dark and one side has light on it. That's going to be easier to then create pencil drawings, for example, because you know where to go dark and where to go light with your pencil. Fill the frame, so getting really close up. The example here is of a person, but this is a really great one if you're taking photographs of objects or of nature. So if you are looking at nature, for example, filling the frame, so going all the way in with your camera or your phone or whatever you're using, so that the whole photograph is that thing. Often a bit of a mistake that pupils can make with this is with photography is that they might go and look at a really beautiful, interesting plant they want to draw, and they take a photograph from a few meters away. And then when you come to draw it, you can see the outlines, but the real detail is going to be much closer up. So thinking about really getting in there, whether that means zooming or standing really, really close to whatever it is. Same with a portrait photograph like the example here. Center dominant eye, so you can see that the model in this image, the middle eye, one of the eyes is right in the middle of the photograph. So rather than being symmetrical, it means that the eye is right in the middle of the image, and this creates that effect where if you move in a different place to the portrait, it still feels like it's looking at you. So Leonardo da Vinci did this very famously with the Mona Lisa, and you will see it in lots of famous and probably less famous portraits in photography and in terms of painting and things like that. It is a really clever technique to make the reader, sorry, I keep saying reader, the viewer feel really drawn in. Like when I move like this, I still feel as though she is looking at me. And that, again, really connects the person looking at the art with the image that they're looking at. Patterns and repetition. So here you've got the repetition of the little like trolleys or bicycles, whatever they are, the fabric of the top of them. Obviously, an image like this is going to depend upon you coming across a situation like this. You know, I've never seen this in real life, but you can find it elsewhere. You know, in a classroom, you'll see rows and rows of chairs. Maybe in your school hall, you'll see the sort of layout of that is going to be repetition. There's going to be a lot of chairs. There's going to be maybe the banisters on the stairs. You're going to get lots and lots of lines and bars. So really look around. Places that you are very used to looking at, you might not have noticed, actually do have patterns and repetition. Or create your own. If you're looking at objects, see if you can get 3 of them and take a photograph of all 3 or more. There are 2 sides to it, whether you're going to create this yourself or try and find it naturally. And finally, symmetry. Our brains really like symmetrical things, quite simply. So trying to take a photograph where possible, this image, for example, you've already got the symmetry in existence because the child is symmetrical, has 2 arms, 2 legs, the face is symmetrical, and is on a bike, I think it is. That means that there's a hand either side and a handlebar, so the symmetry already exists, but if you were to take the photograph from a different angle, it wouldn't be symmetrical. So that is one where you are slightly controlling what's in front of you, but it also needs to be symmetrical in the first place for this to work. You then need to notice that it's symmetrical and take the photograph in that way. So if you are interested in developing specifically your photography, maybe try and take a photograph in each 9 of these composition tips. If you are not, but you need photographs for, I'll talk a bit more about purpose in a second, but for another purpose in your project, still think, okay, well, I'm not going to really focus in on photography as a specific art form for my work, but actually symmetry would be great, and so would rule of thirds. So maybe I'll just take a few photos in that way to get me started. So I'm going to give you an example now of a photographer and how his work shows these techniques. So this is a photograph by Aaron Huey. And the interesting points are, so you can see the hand coming towards the viewer makes it much bigger than the head is, which makes an interesting play with perspective. So quite simply, by having the hand in the foreground, it makes the hand look really big and slightly distorted, and then you've got the smaller face behind. It's just making an interesting image to look at. The repeated image of the face creates interest to the eye, so you can see the face 3 times. The line is almost across the lower third of the horizon. So it's not quite, because towards the one side of the photograph it comes into the middle, and then towards the other side it is much lower, but it has a suggestion of rule of thirds. So these compositional tips they can be wiggled. They don't need to be completely specific. We're not suggesting that you measure the photograph and split it into 3, but this suggests that technique as well. You've also got leading lines, which creates dynamic. It makes it look dynamic, and accentuated by that flash of yellow. So you've got contrasting colours there as well, which we haven't mentioned, but the blue and the yellow create a contrast of colour and can just make an exciting photograph. Same artist again here, who I meant to mention before, but he's widely known for his very long solo walk across America, where he documented it, taking photographs as he went. So here is another image by him. So the perspective here is, as I mentioned previously, it's from a worm's eye view. So perhaps the person taking the photograph is lying on the floor, or at least crouching, which you may have seen photographers do on sort of photo shoots and things like that. But it allows you to create a look of dominance from the structure or the person or the object that you are photographing. So this building looks really imposing because it feels as though we're looking up at it. So either we're very small or we're lying on the floor as the viewer. Whereas if the person had taken it head on, it would be a very different angle. So that's creating a really interesting composition. Again, we've got diagonal lines here, which creates energy, and as I said before, makes the image dynamic. Then the contrast of the birds against the sky creates depth too. So it is slightly suggesting the repeating pattern. Even though the birds are in slightly different shapes, you've got this repeat of a shape across the sky that contrasts light and dark. So another one of Steve McCurry's tips. And the use of patterns on the building as well. As well as this, there is a range of blues with one contrast of yellow. So Steve McCurry's tips of, if you watch the video, I don't think I said it in my overview a moment ago, but he talks about finding patterns, and then he also says that within that one, if you can then make a break in the pattern, it creates a really interesting energy. So here we've got almost everything is blue with this little pop of yellow in the bottom. So Aaron Huey is, again, as he did with the other image, contrasting blues and yellows. So thinking carefully about your colours as well is a really interesting technique. Obviously, you can't control the colour of a building that you come across, but you can then think, ooh, that building is blue. Yeah, I know that yellow looks really good with that building. I'm just going to make sure I've got a yellow top on when I go there. Simple things like that can make a really interesting photograph. And planning ahead a little bit, but also playing with chance. Maybe it's really sunny, maybe it's raining, maybe there's no one else there, or maybe it's really busy, and then deliberately deciding how to control those elements. So when you are working in your sort of photography section of this project, these are the questions that you need to ask yourself. And I've mentioned this briefly, but to go into a bit more detail now. What is the purpose of your photography? Are you taking photographs to draw or paint from? You need to do observational drawings, and that might mean sitting in front of something for a while, but you'll want to document that as well. Most things won't stay still for long enough for you to do a really detailed drawing. So maybe your photographs are predominantly to draw or paint from. Or is the photograph the art itself? And will you be displaying it with your final work? Would you project it? Would you have it printed A3 and hung as a piece of artwork in itself? Try and picture when you're preparing to take these photographs what it is going to be for. Is it a preparatory image to go in your sketchbook and help you draw and learn and match the colours and prepare for your final further on artworks? Or is this a piece of artwork? In which case it's going to look different. So, for example, if you were looking at leaves, if I wanted to draw the leaves, This could be a perfectly fine photograph. So it's on top of some paper, but does that matter when I'm going to be drawing it? Not really. I won't draw the paper. I like the layers. There's a bit of shadowing. There's some bits that are quite shiny, so there is some contrast between light and dark. So actually, if I were to start to draw that with my pencil, could I see where I would shade? Yes, I can see darker parts. It's not completely sort of soaked in light, which means it's difficult to put shadow in to make it 3D. So yeah, relatively successful. Do I want just one leaf and with a bit more dramatic shadowing? If so, perhaps this would be a more successful image. Actually, do I want to make a complete art piece of a photograph of my leaf, in which case I'm going to go out into nature and take a completely different kind of image than I would if I'm going to draw from it. You can, of course, still draw from this, but this is, you'll see that if you think about the Steve McCurry again, you've got a section of sort of empty background and a section at the bottom. So this is placed in the middle third, so it is addressing the rule of thirds. It is also looking at aperture because the leaves themselves are in focus, but the background is blurry. And it's also showing contrast. So the leaves are really lit and have lots of little colours on them, and the background is just quite dark, and there's not much going on there in terms of colour. So this image is much more of a piece of artwork. This isn't my photograph. This is from Google. This is a photographer. So these I've taken. And you can really see the difference. Yeah. Equally, maybe you want to put the leaf onto, float it and take a photograph like that. So these two are more artworks in themselves. You can, of course, still draw from them. And maybe you want a combination because you are going to draw the leaf, but you're also going to project a photograph of the leaf next to your drawing of the leaf for an exhibition. There's no right or wrong. These are all just suggestions, but I just want you to really notice the difference in these photographs. Again, if actually what you want from the leaf is the really detailed, close-up texture of the sort of veins and stalks of the leaf, then you might want a completely different kind of photograph because you might want to go really, really close up. Again, maybe that's so that you can display this image as an image in itself, or maybe it's so that you can draw from it. Maybe you want to make a textile piece where you stitch all of these veins and things into your work, in which case you might struggle to do that from some of these because the texture is very different. So it is really important to think really carefully about what it is that you are aiming for in your photography. So, in summary, photography is an amazing tool to not only develop your art skills and move your project forward, but also to hit the assessment objectives and get you the marks you deserve. So this is an authentic way of developing you as an artist, but also an authentic way of getting the marks and grades that you deserve from your project. As well as this, high quality photographs can be a great addition to your portfolio. So if you're going on to study an art subject at university, and perhaps even some subjects that you might not necessarily consider an art subject, for example, architecture, having a portfolio of amazing photographs will impress. Most companies, most professions, if you can take an excellent photograph, that is going to be beneficial to your career. As well as that, it demonstrates visual literacy. So if you haven't heard that term before, that is showing that you can understand the visual world around you. And in the age that we are living in, and certainly the age that you're going to be going out into careers, you need to be able to understand the visuals around you. If you have a social media account, you probably see 30 images within the first hour of your day if you're someone that looks at social media first thing. You need to be able to understand images in order to understand the world around you. So demonstrating that you can control an image and take a really excellent one is going to be a really helpful thing. Final tips for taking your photographs: prepare. Know what you are going to do. What can you control and what do you need to be prepared for? If you are going to an outdoor space to take photographs, you need to be prepared that it might rain, particularly if you live in the UK. What can you control? Do you want your model to wear a certain outfit? Do you want the objects that you are going to photograph to be dusty rather than clean? Or do you want them to be really clean and shiny? Do you want there to be light coming from one direction? You can control all of these things. Number 2, are any of the compositional tips relevant from the Steve McCurry video? Number 3, what lighting would be ideal? You might not be able to manage it, but knowing what you would like will at least bring you closer to that result. And the main thing that I've reiterated a few times, what are your photographs for? What is the purpose of them? Because that will help you to achieve the results that you need. Okay, so briefly we're going to talk about presentation now, just before the video ends. So for your A-level presentation, as you will have experience throughout GCSE, and if you've already completed year 12, you will have been presenting your work the whole time. But just a moment on that. There are lots of options with presentation. There is a bit of a misconception that you need to work in a sketchbook. You absolutely don't, although they can be brilliant. So these are just some examples, again, from Google and a couple from students that I've taught, of sketchbook pages that are really successful. These are, so on the first image here, this is very much 2 pieces of artwork in a sketchbook. They're not preparatory works, they are not rough or messy, they are really beautiful, very resolved pieces of work with reflective recording and writing around them. This is perhaps one step back from that, so still developing slightly, but still very resolved, very beautiful, very carefully worked on. This piece is a little bit more scrapbooky and perhaps a further, an earlier point in the project. And then you've also got sketchbooks like these. These aren't A-level examples, they are an artist's work. So for an A-level example, I would expect to see a bit more writing, perhaps some more reference images. But the point is, this person has used their sketchbooks to move on their artwork. So drawing and sketching and developing colours and shapes. So as long as you are clear on your purpose of your sketchbook, then they can be a really successful tool. Try not to get too caught up in titles and backgrounds if they're not meaningful to your work. I've certainly had students in the past who've spent a really long time on titles and backgrounds and things that, although do add to how you're showing that you understand visuals and your sort of eye for creating aesthetically pleasing things and perhaps relating those presentation tools to your work, what we really need to see is the work. So it's a fine balance between making a sketchbook page look amazing, but also getting the work done. So just to skip back to that one again, there's no presentational devices in the background here. This person has not spent hours painting the pages of the sketchbook and drawing out a title. They've spent those hours making really amazing artwork. So it's really important to focus on that. Maybe think of some ways of sort of shortcuts for your presentation. Maybe print your titles, all in the same font so that they flow through your sketchbook pages. Maybe you do want to paint the pages and do really detailed titles, but just be mindful of what the most meaningful way to use your time is. As well as sketchbooks, another option is to work on boards. So sort of loose sheets or portfolio pages. These can be really great if you are going to go on to art college or university because you have a portfolio which is prepared. Not that they wouldn't accept sketchbooks, of course they would, but this can look really slick and really professional as well. And then really you can do any kind of presentation you want. Within the exam board, the criteria, the marking criteria, there is nowhere that suggests you have to do a sketchbook or you have to do boards or you have to do anything. As long as you are evidencing everything that you need to hit the assessment objectives, how you present is totally up to you. I've had students make websites, make films, present in a book. So rather than a sketchbook, a really sort of slick, presented book. Again, boards or sketchbooks, excuse me, or whatever you think could be a successful way to show your presentation, to show your work. Perhaps something to do with your theme means that there's a certain type of presentation that would be really amazing to sort of further your theme. So think carefully about how you want to work. If you're working in sketchbooks, try not to get stuck in the book. Come out and make big pieces of artwork too, or small. I always want work to be big, but that's just my personal taste. Put things onto a website. That's a great way of being professional and impressing like potential university courses or employers. If you can then say, yeah, here's my portfolio. It's all online. Particularly, as I said earlier, in a more digital age, that is a very impressive thing to be able to do. So, we've come to the end of the video here. As I have said, there are several videos in this series, so do go back and have a look and see if anything else could be helpful. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this has been useful for you in your A-level work.